In the mid to late 90s, Squaresoft released such an overwhelming plethora of quality games covering every genre under the sun that a few have seemingly been forgotten over time. Threads of Fate, known as Prism in Japan, a more original and memorable title, I might add, is one such game that deserves a resurgence in interest. At the start of the game, you select from two characters, Mint and Rue, each in search of a mythical relic to grant their greatest desire. This choice initiates one of the game's most interesting elements, but also its most uneven. The stories of Mint and Rue are separate but constantly intertwining. Not only does playing each character separately double the content of the game by having you replay from each character's perspective, but playing from the viewpoint of one character and then another alters events and the flow of the main story, so you're not simply playing the same exact scene twice. There's real incentive to play through both stories, as you get a slightly different experience and insight into the motivations of each character. However, the experience is uneven. Rue's story starts off with a darker tone and more meaningful motivation as he seeks the relic to resurrect Claire, the woman who found him years before limping alone and afraid in the snowy mountains, and cared for him after he failed to stop her murder. Rue's story manages to maintain this thread of desperation and loss without losing the colorful and often lighthearted charm of the game. Rue isn't a stoic, angsty hero. He's gentle, positive, and willing to help others, even if it temporarily impedes upon his own quest. Mint is a foil to Rue in nearly every respect. She's rude, selfish, mean-spirited, and almost villainous in her willingness to betray or manipulate anyone to reach her goal of world domination, having lost her right to future ascension to her father's throne to her sister. Thankfully, Mint does experience some good character growth, and a good spirit does occasionally shine through as the game progresses. She's not an unlikable character, but I never felt myself truly rooting for her or connecting with her as I did with Rue. In some ways, it almost feels as if the game might have been better off with expanding Rue's storyline and having Mint as an occasionally playable adversary/companion with her tale merged into Rue's, rather than the two entirely separate playthroughs mechanic. While I may seem rather negative in regards to Mint, I feel that comes largely from having played Rue's story first, back when I first played Threads of Fate well over a decade ago. While replaying the game for this review, I played Mint's story first and found her slightly more endearing, and the unevenness between the two halves of the game to be slightly less pronounced, yet still obvious. However, Mint does play an integral role that elevates Rue's story, in the form of comic relief. Without Mint, Rue's story is charming, heartfelt, and comes with some subtle humor that fall more in the line with cuteness rather than hysterical or slapsticky, which are the elements of humor that Mint brings to the table without feeling out of place or interrupting the flow of the plot. This highlights my opinion that while the two playthroughs are a fun and interesting way to present the story, having Mint as a secondary character in a larger, more Rue-focused plot that combined storylines of the two would possibly have been a superior format. Overall, the narrative is well executed, the characters are fun and engaging, but the general plot isn't anything revolutionary. Gameplay is by far the most interesting part of Threads of Fate, and where the differences between Rue and Mint are best implemented. Throughout the game, Mint will learn numerous spells, along with developing subcategories of those spells for different effects. As her array of spells expands, you will have to learn to strategize based on which spells work best against enemies, as well as learning how to utilize your abilities to solve puzzles. Rue plays very differently. Instead of learning spells, he obtains tokens representing enemies encountered which he can then transform into. Each transformation has its advantages and disadvantages in combat, but unless it was a specific story-oriented transformation, I found Rue's transformations to be more advantageous in the puzzle-solving elements than the majority of combat situations. For example, transforming into a poliwag to zip through a barrier of enemies and lava, whereas Mint would have to jump from pillar to pillar to avoid damage. Or Mint simply defeating an enemy to gain entrance to the next area, while Rue solves a mini puzzle by transforming into one of the same creatures and acting as a statue. This difference in abilities makes both Rue and Mint's playthroughs through the story feel more distinct and fun. But, like the story itself, I did find Rue's gameplay to be slightly more engaging. One element of gameplay they share is the leveling mechanic. Instead of gaining experience and gaining linear levels and set stat boosts, your MP will increase with your usage of magic, and your HP will increase according to the damage you take. While this is an interesting mechanic that reminds me of the likes of Final Fantasy II or the early entries in the Saga series, both also from Square, the mechanic can easily be taken advantage of in the early stages of the game and the game's difficulty nullified. If you hang around an early level, camping around creatures that tend to frequently drop healing or MP regeneration items, and allowing them to hit you over and over again while you blast them with spells until your stats grow exponentially. Even if you don't do this, and you tend to encounter frequent game overs from falling off platforms, being defeated in combat, and the like, you will find many different continue tokens throughout the entire level, some that help you regenerate with a portion of your MP restored, some half, and some fully restored. These are common enough, and the game is easy enough that you really should never have a problem continuing. Charming and colorful without feeling childish, Threads of Fate's visuals are refreshing and fun. Everything from the characters to the spell effects and creatures has an inviting, magical quality, but the environments, while well designed and matching the art style of the people and creatures perfectly, rarely exceed adequacy and don't provide the same uniqueness and imagination as the general art throughout the cover, manual, menus, characters, as well as the soundtrack. While there are only a handful of exceptionally memorable tracks, the entire musical score is a standard fantasy fare transformed with beautiful electronic twists on common themes and shared drum rhythm that enhances the score into one of the game's best features. Threads of Fate isn't quite perfect in its execution, and the adventure, as fun as it is, feels far too short and a little too easy, and doesn't really do anything completely groundbreaking with its story. But the overall experience is exceptionally entertaining and very memorable. It has an undefinable charm and sense of magical fun that helps it surpass its lesser components.